Okay, it worked that time. Woohoo! Okay. Hey, and my touch portal's working and everything, so yay! So today we'll listen to the rest of the book that's about 2 hours, 2 hours and 5 minutes or so. And it's spring 15, the first day for the desert festival. So we'll go do that. And then after the desert festival is done, we'll go and do some practicing of the game. Hi, Angie. How are you doing? Eek. So yeah, we'll get some things done. Where's my? Okay, as long as we're not stuttering, I'm okay. I did the fortune teller already, and that's rain forecast already. Except it did give me a notification that my thing was full, but I just realized that the mod got updated, so it probably got reset to regular settings. Figures it did. Default size, everything else is 120. Kitchen is, I'm going to put it at 240. Same thing with the, oh, 240 and 240 and 240. And then the chest is at 120. And the mini fridge 180. Save and close, because that mod got updated, so hopefully. Hopefully that'll fix up that problem. Looks like it did. I'm just glad it didn't like explode all the extra things all over the floor. Anyway, I'll start up the book. I'm gonna see if this if I got some of the stuff set up right, Angie. Um, I don't know if I got the settings set up right for live. Um, for live captions. In enabled, yeah, okay, it's enabled. Um, okay, so it should be set up right in theory. I don't know. We'll find out. If you could have a look for me, that would be awesome. And if it's not live, at least it'll be there later. But I could also check a few other things. Okay. Okay. Well, let's see if I got these buttons set up right too. Um, okay. First. Oh, yay! That one's set up right. And um,
and fluttering her beautiful draperies. Chapter 17 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17, A Tragic Transformation. "Don't let us worry," said Shaggy to his companions, "for it may take the Queen some time to conquer the Metal Monarch, as Tik-Tok has to do everything in his slow, mechanical way." "Do you suppose they are likely to fail?" asked the Rose Princess. "I do indeed," replied Shaggy. "This Nome King is really a powerful fellow, and has a legion of gnomes to assist him, whereas our bold Queen commands a clockwork man and a band of faint-hearted officers." "She ought to have let Quox do the conquering," said Polychrome, dancing lightly upon a point of rock and fluttering her beautiful draperies. "But perhaps the dragon was wise to let her go first, for when she fails to conquer Ruggedo she may become more modest in her ambitions." "Where is the dragon now?" inquired Ozga. "Up there on the rocks," replied Files. "Look, my dear, you may see him from here. He said he would take a little nap while we were mixing up with Ruggedo, and he added that after we had gotten into trouble he would wake up and conquer the Nome King in a jiffy, as his master the Jinjin has ordered him to do." "Quox means well," said Shaggy, "but I do not think we shall need his services, for just as soon as I am satisfied that Queen Ann and her army have failed to conquer Ruggedo, I shall enter the caverns and show the King my Love Magnet. That he cannot resist. Therefore the conquest will be made with ease." This speech of the Shaggy Man was overheard by the Long-Eared Hearer, who was at that moment standing by Ruggedo's side. For when the King and Guph had recovered from Hank's kick and had picked themselves up, their first act was to turn Tik-Tok on his back and put a heavy diamond on top of him, so that he could not get up again. Then they carefully put his gun in a corner of the cavern, and the King sent Guph to fetch the Long-Eared Hearer. The Hearer was still angry at Ruggedo for breaking his ear, but he acknowledged the Nome King to be his master and was ready to obey his commands. Therefore he repeated Shaggy's speech to the King, who at once realized that his kingdom was in grave danger, for Ruggedo knew of the Love Magnet and its powers, and was horrified at the thought that Shaggy might show him the magic talisman and turn all the hatred in his heart into love. Ruggedo was proud of his hatred and abhorred love of any sort. "Really," said he, "I'd rather be conquered and lose my wealth and my kingdom than gaze at that awful Love Magnet. What can I do to prevent the Shaggy Man from taking it out of his pocket?" Kaliko returned to the cavern in time to overhear this question, and being a loyal nome and eager to serve his King, he answered by saying: "If we can manage to bind the Shaggy Man's arms tight to his body, he could not get the Love Magnet out of his pocket." "True!" cried the King in delight at this easy solution of the problem. "Get at once a dozen nomes with ropes, and place them in the passage where they can seize and bind Shaggy as soon as he enters." This Kaliko did, and meanwhile the watchers outside the entrance were growing more and more uneasy about their friends. "I don't worry so much about the Oogaboo people," said Polychrome, who had grown sober with waiting and perhaps a little nervous, "for they could not be killed, even though Ruggedo might cause them much suffering and perhaps destroy them utterly. But we should not have allowed Betsy and Hank to go alone into the caverns. The little girl is mortal and possesses no magic powers whatever, so if Ruggedo captures her she will be wholly at his mercy." "That is indeed true," replied Shaggy. "I wouldn't like to have anything happen to dear little Betsy, so I believe I'll go in right away and put an end to all this worry." "We may as well go in with you," asserted Files, "for by means of the Love Magnet you can soon bring the Nome King to reason." So it was decided to wait no longer. Shaggy walked through the entrance first, and after him came the others. They had no thought of danger to themselves, and Shaggy, who was going along with his hands thrust into his pockets, was much surprised when a rope shot out from the darkness and twined round his body, pinning down his arms so securely that he could not even withdraw his hands from the pockets. Then appeared several grinning gnomes, who speedily tied knots in the ropes and then led the prisoner along the passage to the cavern. No attention was paid to the others, but Files and the Princess followed on after Shaggy, determined not to desert their friend and hoping that an opportunity might arise to rescue him. As for Polychrome, as soon as she saw that trouble had overtaken Shaggy, she turned and ran lightly back through the passage and out of the entrance. Then she easily leaped from rock to rock until she paused beside the great dragon, who lay fast asleep. "Wake up, Quox!" she cried. "It's time for you to act." But Quox did not wake up. He lay as one in a trance, absolutely motionless, with his enormous eyes tight closed. The eyelids had big silver scales on them, like all the rest of his body. Polychrome might have thought Quox was dead, had she not known that dragons do not die easily, or had she not observed his huge body swelling as he breathed. She picked up a piece of rock and pounded against his eyelids with it, saying, "Wake up, Quox, wake up!" But he would not waken. "Dear me, how unfortunate!" sighed the lovely Rainbow's Daughter. "I wonder what is the best and surest way to waken a dragon. All our friends may be captured and destroyed while this great beast lies asleep." She walked around Quox 2 or 3 times, trying to discover some tender place on his body where a thump or a punch might be felt. But he lay extended along the rocks with his chin flat upon the ground and his legs drawn underneath his body, and all that one could see was his thick sky blue skin, thicker than that of a rhinoceros, and his silver scales. Then, despairing at last of wakening the beast, and worried over the fate of her friends, Polychrome again ran down to the entrance and hurried along the passage into the Nome King's cavern. Here she found Ruggedo lolling in his throne and smoking a long pipe. Beside him stood General Guph and Kaliko, and ranged before the King were the Rose Princess, Files, and the Shaggy Man. Tik-Tok still lay upon the floor, weighted down by the big diamond. Ruggedo was now in a more contented frame of mind. One by one he had met the invaders and easily captured them. The dreaded Love Magnet was indeed in Shaggy's pocket, only a few feet away from the King, but Shaggy was powerless to show it, and unless Ruggedo's eyes beheld the talisman, it could not affect him. As for Betsy Bobbin and her mule, he believed Kaliko had placed them in the slimy cave, while Ann and her officers he thought safely imprisoned in the pit. Ruggedo had no fear of Files or Ozga, but to be on the safe side he had ordered golden handcuffs placed upon their wrists. These did not cause them any great annoyance, but prevented them from making an attack had they been inclined to do so. The Nome King, thinking himself wholly master of the situation, was laughing and jeering at his prisoners when Polychrome, exquisitely beautiful and dancing like a ray of light, entered the cavern. "Oho!" cried the King. "A rainbow underground, eh?" And then he stared hard at Polychrome, and still harder, and then he sat up and pulled the wrinkles out of his robe and arranged his whiskers. "Oh, on my word," said he, "you are a very captivating creature. Moreover, I perceive you are a fairy." "I am Polychrome, the Rainbow's Daughter," she said proudly. "Well," replied Ruggedo, "I like you. The others I hate. I hate everybody but you. Wouldn't you like to live always in this beautiful cavern, Polychrome? See, the jewels that stud the walls have every tint and color of your rainbow, and they are not so elusive. I'll have fresh dewdrops gathered for your feasting every day, and you shall be queen of all my gnomes and pull Kaliko's nose whenever you like." "No, thank you," laughed Polychrome. "My home is in the sky, and I'm only on a visit to this solid, sordid earth. But tell me, Ruggedo, why my friends have been wound with cords and bound with chains." "They threatened me," answered Ruggedo. "The fools did not know how powerful I am." "Then, since they are now helpless, why not release them and send them back to the earth's surface?" "Because I hate 'em and mean to make 'em suffer for their invasion. But I'll make a bargain with you, sweet Polly. Remain here and live with me, and I'll set all these people free. You shall be my daughter, or my wife, or my aunt or grandmother, whichever you like. Only stay here to brighten my gloomy kingdom and make me happy." Polychrome looked at him wonderingly. Then she turned to Shaggy and asked, "Are you sure he hasn't seen the Love Magnet?" "I'm positive," answered Shaggy. "But you seem to be something of a Love Magnet yourself, Polychrome." She laughed and said to Ruggedo, "Not even to rescue my friends would I live in your kingdom, nor could I endure for long the society of such a wicked monster as you." "You forget," retorted the King, scowling darkly, "that you are in my power." "Not so, Ruggedo. The Rainbow's Daughter is beyond the reach of your spite or malice." "Seize her!" suddenly shouted the King, and General Guph sprang forward to obey. Polychrome stood quite still, yet when Guph attempted to clutch her, his hands met in air, and now the Rainbow's Daughter was in another part of the room, as smiling and composed as before. Several times Guph endeavored to capture her, and Ruggedo even came down from his throne to assist his general, but never could they lay hands upon the lovely Sky Fairy, who flitted here and there with the swiftness of light, and constantly defied them with her merry laughter as she evaded their efforts. So after a time they abandoned the chase, and Ruggedo returned to his throne and wiped the perspiration from his face with a finely woven handkerchief of cloth of gold. "Well," said Polychrome, "what do you intend to do now?" "I'm going to have some fun, to repay me for all my bother," replied the Nome King. Then he said to Kaliko, "Summon the executioners." Kaliko at once withdrew and presently returned with a score of nomes, all of whom were nearly as evil looking as their hated master. They bore great golden pincers and prods of silver, and clamps and chains and various wicked looking instruments, all made of precious metals and set with diamonds and rubies. "Now, Pang," said Ruggedo, addressing the leader of the executioners, "fetch the army of Oogaboo and their queen from the pit, and torture them here in my presence, as well as in the presence of their friends. It will be great sport." "I hear your Majesty, and I obey your Majesty," answered Pang, and went with his nomes into the passage. In a few minutes he returned and bowed to Ruggedo. "They're all gone," said he. "Gone!" exclaimed the Nome King. "Gone where?" "They left no address, your Majesty, but they are not in the pit." "Picks and puddles!" roared the King. "Who took the cover off?" "No one," said Pang. "The cover was there, but the prisoners were not under it." "In that case," snarled the King, trying to control his disappointment, "go to the slimy cave and fetch hither the girl and the donkey, and while we are torturing them, Kaliko must take 100 nomes and search for the escaped prisoners, the Queen of Oogaboo and her officers. If he does not find them, I will torture Kaliko." Kaliko went away looking sad and disturbed, for he knew the king was cruel and unjust enough to carry out this threat. Pang and the executioners also went away in another direction, but when they came back, Betsy Bobbin was not with them, nor was Hank. "There is no one in the slimy cave, your Majesty," reported Pang. "Jumping jelly cakes!" screamed the king. "Another escape! Are you sure you found the right cave?" "There is but one slimy cave, and there is no one in it," returned Pang positively. Ruggedo was beginning to be alarmed as well as angry. However, these disappointments but made him the more vindictive, and he cast an evil look at the other prisoners and said: "Never mind the girl and the donkey. Here are four at least who cannot escape my vengeance. Let me see. I believe I'll change my mind about Tik-Tok. Have the gold crucible heated to a white seething heat, and then we'll dump the copper man into it and melt him up." "But, your Majesty," protested Kaliko, who had returned to the room after sending 100 nomes to search for the Oogaboo people, "you must remember that Tik-Tok is a very curious and interesting machine. It would be a shame to deprive the world of such a clever contrivance." "Say another word, and you'll go into the furnace with him," roared the king. "I'm getting tired of you, Kaliko, and the first thing you know I'll turn you into a potato and make Saratoga chips of you. The next to consider," he added more mildly, "is the Shaggy Man. As he owns the Love Magnet, I think I'll transform him into a dove, and then we can practice shooting at him with Tik-Tok's gun. Now this is a very interesting ceremony, and I beg you all to watch me closely and see that I've nothing up my sleeve." He came out of his throne to stand before the Shaggy Man, and then he waved his hands, palms downward, in 7 semicircles over his victim's head, saying in a low but clear tone of voice the magic wugwa: "Adi, Edi, Edi, Odi, Udi, Uiu, Iu, I-O, Idi, Idawu." The effect of this well known sorcery was instantaneous. Instead of the Shaggy Man, a pretty dove lay fluttering upon the floor, its wings confined by tiny cords wound around them. Ruggedo gave an order to Pang, who cut the cords with a pair of scissors. Being freed, the dove quickly flew upward and alighted on the shoulder of the Rose Princess, who stroked it tenderly. "Very good, very good!" cried Ruggedo, rubbing his hands gleefully together. "One enemy is out of my way, and now for the others." Perhaps my readers should be warned not to attempt the above transformation, for although the exact magical formula has been described, it is unlawful in all civilized countries for anyone to transform a person into a dove by muttering the words Ruggedo used. There were no laws to prevent the Nome King from performing this transformation, but if it should be attempted in any other country and the magic worked, the magician would be severely punished. When Polychrome saw Shaggy Man transformed into a dove, and realized that Ruggedo was about to do something as dreadful to the Princess in Files, and that Tik-Tok would soon be melted in a crucible, she turned and ran from the cavern, through the passage, and back to the place where Quox lay asleep. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18: A Clever Conquest. The great dragon still had his eyes closed, and was even snoring in a manner that resembled distant thunder. But Polychrome was now desperate, because any further delay meant the destruction of her friends. She seized the pearl necklace to which was attached the great locket, and jerked it with all her strength. The result was encouraging. Quox stopped snoring, and his eyelids flickered, so Polychrome jerked again and again, till slowly the great lids raised, and the dragon looked at her steadily. Said he, in a sleepy tone,
"What's the matter, little Rainbow?"
"Come quick!" exclaimed Polychrome. "Ruggedo has captured all our friends and is about to destroy them."
"Very well,"
said Quox.
"I suspected that would happen. Step a little out of my path, my dear, and I'll make a rush for the Nome King's cavern."
She fell back a few steps, and Quox raised himself on his stout legs, whisked his long tail, and in an instant had slid down the rocks and made a dive through the entrance. Along the passage he swept, nearly filling it with his immense body, and now he poked his head into the jeweled cavern of Ruggedo. But the king had long since made arrangements to capture the dragon whenever he might appear. No sooner did Quox stick his head into the room than a thick chain fell from above and encircled his neck. Then the ends of the chain were drawn tight, for in an adjoining cavern 1,000 nomes were pulling on them, and so the dragon could advance no further toward the king. He could not use his teeth or his claws, and as his body was still in the passage, he had not even room to strike his foes with his terrible tail. Ruggedo was delighted with the success of his stratagem. He had just transformed the Rose Princess into a fiddle, and was about to transform Files into a fiddle bow, when the dragon appeared to interrupt him. So he called out, "Welcome, my dear Quox, to my royal entertainment. Since you are here, you shall witness some very neat magic. And after I have finished with Files and Tik-Tok, I mean to transform you into a tiny lizard, one of the chameleon sort, and you shall live in my cavern and amuse me."
"Pardon my contradicting your Majesty,"
returned Quox in a quiet voice,
"but I don't believe you'll perform any more magic."
"Eh? Why not?" asked the king in surprise.
"There's a reason,"
said Quox.
"Do you see this ribbon around my neck?"
"Yes, and I'm astonished that a dignified dragon would wear such a silly thing."
"Do you see it plainly?"
persisted the dragon, with a little chuckle of amusement. "I do," declared Ruggedo.
"Then you no longer possess any magical powers, and are as helpless as a clam," asserted Quox. "My great master, Tititi, the Jinjin, enchanted this ribbon in such a way that whenever your Majesty looked upon it, all magic of knowledge would desert you instantly. Nor would any magical formula you can remember ever perform your bidding."
"Pooh, I don't believe a word of it!" cried Ruggedo, half frightened nevertheless. Then he turned toward Files and tried to transform him into a fiddle bow. But he could not remember the right words, or the right pass of the hands, and after several trials he finally gave up the attempt. By this time the Nome King was so alarmed that he was secretly shaking in his shoes. "I told you not to anger Tititi Hoochoo," grumbled Kaliko, "and now you see the result of your disobedience." Ruggedo promptly threw his scepter at his royal chamberlain, who dodged it with his usual cleverness, and then he said with an attempt to swagger, "Never mind, I don't need magic to enable me to destroy these invaders. Fire and the sword will do the business, and I am still King of the Nomes, and Lord and Master of my underground kingdom."
"Again, I beg to differ with your Majesty," said Quox. "The great Jinjin commands you to depart instantly from this kingdom and seek the earth's surface, where you will wander for all time to come, without a home or country, without a friend or follower, and without any more riches than you can carry with you in your pockets. The great Jinjin is so generous that he will allow you to fill your pockets with jewels or gold, but you must take nothing more."
Ruggedo now stared at the dragon in amazement. "Does Titichi Hoochoo condemn me to such a fate?" he asked in a hoarse voice.
"He does,"
said Quox. "And just for throwing a few strangers down the forbidden tube?"
"Just for that,"
repeated Quox in a stern, gruff voice. "Well, I won't do it, and your crazy old Jinjin can't make me do it either," declared Ruggedo. "I intend to remain here, King of the Nomes, until the end of the world, and I defy your Titichi Hoochoo and all his fairies, as well as his clumsy messenger, whom I have been obliged to chain up." The dragon smiled again, but it was not the sort of smile that made Ruggedo feel very happy. Instead, there was something so cold and merciless in the dragon's expression that the condemned Nome King trembled and was sick at heart. There was little comfort for Ruggedo in the fact that the dragon was now chained, although he had boasted of it. He glared at the immense head of Quox as if fascinated, and there was fear in the old King's eyes as he watched his enemy's movements. For the dragon was now moving, not abruptly, but as if he had something to do and was about to do it. Very deliberately he raised one claw, touched the catch of the great jeweled locket that was suspended around his neck, and at once it opened wide. Nothing much happened at first. Half a dozen hen's eggs rolled out upon the floor, and then the locket closed with a sharp click. But the effect upon the nomes of this simple thing was astounding. General Guph, Kaliko, Pang, and his band of executioners were all standing close to the door that led to the vast series of underground caverns which constituted the dominions of the nomes, and as soon as they saw the eggs they raised a chorus of frantic screams and rushed through the door, slamming it in Ruggedo's face and placing a heavy bronze bar across it. Ruggedo, dancing with terror and uttering loud cries, now leaped upon the seat of his throne to escape the eggs, which had rolled steadily toward him. Perhaps these eggs, sent by the wise and crafty Tititi Hoochoo, were in some way enchanted, for they all rolled directly after Ruggedo, and when they reached the throne where he had taken refuge, they began rolling up the legs to the seat. This was too much for the king to bear. His horror of the eggs was real and absolute, and he made a leap from the throne to the center of the room and then ran to a far corner. The eggs followed, rolling slowly but steadily in his direction. Ruggedo threw his scepter at them, and then his ruby crown, and then he drew off his heavy golden sandals and hurled these at the advancing eggs. But the eggs dodged every missile and continued to draw nearer. The king stood trembling, his eyes staring in terror, until they were but half a yard distant. Then, with an agile leap, he jumped clear over them and made a rush for the passage that led to the outer entrance. Of course the dragon was in his way, being chained in the passage with his head in the cavern, but when he saw the king making toward him he crouched as low as he could and dropped his chin to the floor, leaving a small space between his body and the roof of the passage. Ruggedo did not hesitate an instant. Impelled by fear, he leaped to the dragon's nose, and then scrambled to his back, where he succeeded in squeezing himself through the opening. After the head was past, there was more room, and he slid along the dragon's scales to his tail, and then ran as fast as his legs would carry him to the entrance. Not pausing here, so great was his fright, the king dashed on down the mountain path, but before he had gone very far he stumbled and fell. When he picked himself up, he observed that no one was following him, and while he recovered his breath he happened to think of the decree of the Jinjin, that he should be driven from his kingdom and made a wanderer on the face of the earth. Well, here he was, driven from his cavern in truth, driven by those dreadful eggs. But he would go back and defy them. He would not submit to losing his precious kingdom and his tyrannical powers, all because Tititi Hoochoo had said he must. So, although still afraid, Ruggedo nerved himself to creep back along the path to the entrance, and when he arrived there, he saw the 6 eggs lying in a row just before the arched opening. At first he paused a safe distance away to consider the case, for the eggs were now motionless. While he was wondering what could be done, he remembered there was a magical charm which would destroy eggs and render them harmless to nomes. There were 9 passes to be made and 6 verses of incantation to be recited, but Ruggedo knew them all. Now that he had ample time to be exact, he carefully went through the entire ceremony. But nothing happened. The eggs did not disappear as he had expected, so he repeated the charm a second time. When that also failed, he remembered with a moan of despair that his magic power had been taken away from him, and in the future he could do no more than any common mortal. And there were the eggs, forever barring him from the kingdom which he had ruled so long with absolute sway. He threw rocks at them, but could not hit a single egg. He raved and scolded and tore his hair and beard and danced in helpless passion, but that did nothing to avert the just judgment of the Jinjin, which Ruggedo's own evil deeds had brought upon him. From this time on he was an outcast, a wanderer upon the face of the earth, and he had even forgotten to fill his pockets with gold and jewels before he fled from his former kingdom. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19, King Kaliko. After the king had made good his escape, Files said to the dragon in a sad voice, "Alas, why did you not come before? Because you were sleeping instead of conquering, the lovely Rose Princess has become a fiddle without a bow, while poor Shaggy sits there, a cooing dove."
"Don't worry,"
replied Quox.
"Tititi Hoochoo knows his business, and I have my orders from the great Jinjin himself. Bring the fiddle here and touch it lightly to my pink ribbon."
Files obeyed, and at the moment of contact with the ribbon, the Nome King's charm was broken, and the Rose Princess herself stood before them, as sweet and smiling as ever. The dove, perched on the back of the throne, had seen and heard all this, so without being told what to do, it flew straight to the dragon and alighted on the ribbon. Next instant Shaggy was himself again, and Quox said to him grumblingly,
"Please get off my left toe, Shaggy Man, and be more particular where you step."
"I beg your pardon," replied Shaggy, very glad to resume his natural form. Then he ran to lift the heavy diamond off Tik-Tok's chest and to assist the Clockwork Man to his feet. "Many thanks," said Tik-Tok. "Where is the wicked king who wanted to melt me in a crucible?" "He has gone, and gone for good," answered Polychrome, who had managed to squeeze into the room beside the dragon, and had witnessed the occurrences with much interest. "But I wonder where Betsy Bobbin and Hank can be, and if any harm has befallen them." "We must search the cavern until we find them," declared Shaggy. But when he went to the door leading to the other caverns, he found it shut and barred.
"I've a pretty strong push in my forehead," said Quox, "and I believe I can break down that door, even though it's made of solid gold."
"But you are a prisoner, and the chains that hold you are fastened in some other room, so that we cannot release you," Files said anxiously.
"Oh, never mind that," returned the dragon. "I have remained a prisoner only because I wish to be one."
And with this he stepped forward and burst the stout chains as easily as if they had been threads. But when he tried to push in the heavy metal door, even his mighty strength failed, and after several attempts he gave it up and squatted himself in a corner to think of a better way. "I'll open the door," asserted Tik-Tok, and going to the King's big gong, he pounded upon it until the noise was almost deafening. Kaliko, in the next cavern, was wondering what had happened to Ruggedo and if he had escaped the eggs and outwitted the dragon. But when he heard the sound of the gong, which had so often called him into the King's presence, he decided that Ruggedo had been victorious. So he took away the bar, threw open the door, and entered the royal cavern. Great was his astonishment to find the King gone, and the enchantments removed from the Princess and Shaggy. But the eggs were also gone, and so Kaliko advanced to the dragon, whom he knew to be Tititi Hoochoo's messenger, and bowed humbly before the beast. "What is your will?" he inquired.
"Where is Betsy?"
demanded the dragon. "Safe in my own private room," said Kaliko.
"Go and get her,"
commanded Quox. So Kaliko went to Betsy's room and gave 3 raps upon the door. The little girl had been asleep, but she heard the raps and opened the door. "You may come out now," said Kaliko. "The King has fled in disgrace, and your friends are asking for you." So Betsy and Hank returned with the royal chamberlain to the throne cavern, where she was received with great joy by her friends. They told her what had happened to Ruggedo, and she told them how kind Kaliko had been to her. Quox did not have much to say until the conversation was ended, but then he turned to Kaliko and asked:
"Do you suppose you could rule your nomes better than Ruggedo has done?"
"Me?" stammered the chamberlain, greatly surprised by the question. "Well, I couldn't be a worse king, I'm sure."
"Would the nomes obey you?"
inquired the dragon. "Of course," said Kaliko. "They like me better than they ever did Ruggedo."
"Then hereafter you shall be the Metal Monarch, King of the Nomes, and Tititi Hoochoo expects you to rule your kingdom wisely and well,"
said Quox. "Hooray!" cried Betsy. "I'm glad of that. King Kaliko, I salute your majesty and wish you joy in your gloomy old kingdom." "We all wish him joy," said Polychrome, and then the others made haste to congratulate the new king. "Will you release my dear brother?" asked Shaggy. "The ugly one? Very willingly," replied Kaliko. "I begged Ruggedo long ago to send him away, but he would not do so. I also offered to help your brother to escape, but he would not go." "He is so conscientious," said Shaggy, highly pleased. "All of our family have noble natures." "But is my dear brother well?" he asked anxiously. "He eats and sleeps very steadily," replied the new King. "I hope he doesn't work too hard," said Shaggy. "He doesn't work at all. In fact, there is nothing he can do in these dominions as well as our nomes, whose numbers are so great that it worries us to keep them all busy. So your brother has only to amuse himself." "Why, it's more like visiting than being a prisoner," asserted Betsy. "Not exactly," returned Kaliko. "A prisoner cannot go where or when he pleases, and is not his own master." "Where is my brother now?" inquired Shaggy. "In the Metal Forest." "Where is that?" "The Metal Forest is in the great domed cave, the largest in all our dominions," replied Kaliko. "It is almost like being out of doors, it is so big, and Ruggedo made the wonderful forest to amuse himself, as well as to tire out his hard working nomes. All the trees are gold and silver, and the ground is strewn with precious stones, so it is a sort of treasury." "Let us go there at once and rescue my dear brother," pleaded Shaggy earnestly. Kaliko hesitated. "I don't believe I can find the way," said he. "Ruggedo made 3 secret passages to the Metal Forest, but he changes the location of these passages every week, so that no one can get to the Metal Forest without his permission. However, if we look sharp, we may be able to discover one of these secret ways." "That reminds me to ask what has become of Queen Ann and the officers of Oogaboo," said Files. "I'm sure I can't say," replied Kaliko. "Do you suppose Ruggedo destroyed them?" "Oh, no. I'm quite sure he didn't. They fell into the big pit in the passage, and we put the cover on to keep them there, but when the executioners went to look for them, they had all disappeared from the pit, and we could find no trace of them." "That's funny," remarked Betsy thoughtfully. "I don't believe Ann knew any magic, or she'd have worked it before. But to disappear like that seems like magic, now doesn't it?" They agreed that it did, but no one could explain the mystery. "However," said Shaggy, "they are gone, that is certain, so we cannot help them or be helped by them, and the important thing just now is to rescue my dear brother from captivity." "Why do they call him the Ugly One?" asked Betsy. "I don't know," confessed Shaggy. "I cannot remember his looks very well, it is so long since I have seen him, but all our family are noted for their handsome faces." Betsy laughed and Shaggy seemed rather hurt, but Polychrome relieved his embarrassment by saying softly: "One can be ugly in looks but lovely in disposition." "Our first task," said Shaggy, a little comforted by this remark, "is to find one of those secret passages to the Metal Forest." "True," replied Kaliko. "So I think I will assemble the chief nomes of my kingdom in this throne room and tell them that I am their new King. Then I can ask them to assist us in searching for the secret passages."
That's a good idea,
said the dragon, who seemed to be getting sleepy again. Kaliko went to the big gong and pounded on it just as Ruggedo used to do, but no one answered the summons. "Of course not," said he, jumping up from the throne, where he had seated himself. "That is my call, and I am still the Royal Chamberlain, and will be until I appoint another in my place." So he ran out of the room and found Guph and told him to answer the summons of the King's gong. Having returned to the royal cavern, Kaliko first pounded the gong and then sat, wearing Ruggedo's discarded ruby crown and holding in his hand the scepter which Ruggedo had so often thrown at his head. When Guph entered he was amazed. "Better get out of that throne before old Ruggedo comes back," he said warningly. "He isn't coming back, and I am now the King of the Nomes in his stead," announced Kaliko.
All of which is quite true,"
asserted the dragon, and all of those who stood around the throne bowed respectfully to the new king. Seeing this, Guff also bowed, for he was glad to be rid of such a hard master as Ruggedo. Then Kaliko, in quite a kingly way, informed Guff that he was appointed the royal chamberlain, and promised not to throw the scepter at his head unless he deserved it. All this being pleasantly arranged, the new chamberlain went away to tell the news to all the nomes of the underground kingdom, every one of whom would be delighted with the change in kings. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. Quox quietly quits. When the chief nomes assembled before their new king, they joyfully saluted him and promised to obey his commands. But when Kaliko questioned them, none knew the way to the Metal Forest, although all had assisted in its making. So the king instructed them to search carefully for one of the passages, and to bring him the news as soon as they had found it. Meanwhile, Quox had managed to back out of the rocky corridor, and to regain the open air and his old station on the mountainside, and there he lay upon the rocks, sound asleep until the next day. The others of the party were all given as good rooms as the caverns of the nomes afforded, for King Kaliko felt that he was indebted to them for his promotion, and was anxious to be as hospitable as he could. Much wonderment had been caused by the absolute disappearance of the 16 officers of Oogaboo and their queen. Not a nome had seen them, nor were they discovered during the search for the passages leading to the Metal Forest. Perhaps no one was unhappy over their loss, but all were curious to know what had become of them. On the next day, when our friends went to visit the dragon, Quox said to them,
"I must now bid you good-bye, for my mission here is finished, and I must depart for the other side of the world, where I belong."
"Will you go through the tube again?" asked Betsy.
"To be sure, but it will be a lonely trip this time, with no one to talk to, and I cannot invite any of you to go with me. Therefore, as soon as I slide into the hole, I shall go to sleep, and when I pop out at the other end I will wake up at home."
They thanked the dragon for befriending them and wished him a pleasant journey. Also they sent their thanks to the great Jinjin, whose just condemnation of Ruggedo had served their interests so well. Then Quox yawned and stretched himself, and ambled over to the tube, into which he slid head foremost and disappeared. They really felt as if they had lost a friend, for the dragon had been both kind and sociable during their brief acquaintance with him, but they knew it was his duty to return to his own country. So they went back to the caverns to renew the search for the hidden passages that led to the forest. But for 3 days all efforts to find them proved in vain. It was Polychrome's custom to go every day to the mountain and watch for her father, the Rainbow, for she was growing tired with wandering upon the earth, and longed to rejoin her sisters in their sky palaces. And on the 3rd day, while she sat motionless upon a point of rock, whom should she see slyly creeping up the mountain but Ruggedo. The former king looked very forlorn. His clothes were soiled and torn, and he had no sandals upon his feet or hat upon his head. Having left his crown and scepter behind when he fled, the old nome no longer seemed kingly, but more like a beggar man. Several times had Ruggedo crept up to the mouth of the caverns, only to find the 6 eggs still on guard. He knew quite well that he must accept his fate and become a homeless wanderer, but his chief regret now was that he had neglected to fill his pockets with gold and jewels. He was aware that a wanderer with wealth at his command would fare much better than one who was a pauper, so he still loitered around the caverns wherein he knew so much treasure was stored, hoping for a chance to fill his pockets. That was how he came to recollect the Metal Forest. "Aha!" said he to himself. "I alone know the way to that forest, and once there I can fill my pockets with the finest jewels in all the world." He glanced at his pockets and was grieved to find them so small. Perhaps they might be enlarged, so that they would hold more. He knew a poor woman who lived in a cottage at the foot of the mountain, so he went to her and begged her to sew pockets all over his robe, paying her with a gift of a diamond ring which he had worn upon his finger. The woman was delighted to possess so valuable a ring, and she sewed as many pockets on Ruggedo's robe as she possibly could. Then he returned up the mountain, and after gazing cautiously around to make sure he was not observed, he touched a spring in a rock, and it swung slowly backward, disclosing a broad passageway. This he entered, swinging the rock in place behind him. However, Ruggedo had failed to look as carefully as he might have done, for Polychrome was seated only a little distance off, and her clear eyes marked exactly the manner in which Ruggedo had released the hidden spring. So she rose and hurried into the cavern, where she told Kaliko and his friends of her discovery. "I've no doubt that that is a way to the Metal Forest," exclaimed Shaggy. "Come, let us follow Ruggedo at once and rescue my poor brother." They agreed to this, and King Kaliko called together a band of nomes to assist them by carrying torches to light their way. "The Metal Forest has a brilliant light of its own," said he, "but the passage across the valley is likely to be dark." Polychrome easily found the rock and touched the spring, so in less than an hour after Ruggedo had entered they were all in the passage and following swiftly after the former king. "He means to rob the forest, I'm sure," said Kaliko, "but he will find he is no longer of any account in this kingdom, and I will have my nomes throw him out." "Then please throw him as hard as you can," said Betsy, "for he deserves it. I don't mind an honest, out and out enemy who fights square, but changing girls into fiddles and ordering 'em put into slimy caves is mean and tricky. So Ruggedo doesn't deserve any sympathy. But you'll have to let him take as much treasure as he can get in his pockets, Kaliko." "Yes, the Jinjin said so, and we won't miss it much. There is more treasure in the Metal Forest than 1,000,000 nomes could carry in their pockets." It was not difficult to walk through this passage, especially when the torches lighted the way, so they made good progress. But it proved to be a long distance, and Betsy had tired herself with walking and was seated upon the back of the mule when the passage made a sharp turn and a wonderful and glorious light burst upon them. The next moment they were all standing upon the edge of the marvelous Metal Forest. It lay under another mountain and occupied a great domed cavern, the roof of which was higher than a church steeple. In this space the industrious nomes had built, during many years of labor, the most beautiful forest in the world. The trees, trunks, branches and leaves were all of solid gold, while the bushes and underbrush were formed of filigree silver, virgin pure. The trees towered as high as natural live oaks do, and were of exquisite workmanship. On the ground were thickly strewn precious gems of every hue and size, while here and there among the trees were paths pebbled with cut diamonds of the clearest water. Taken altogether, more treasure was gathered in this metal forest than is contained in all the rest of the world, if we except the land of Oz, where perhaps its value is equaled in the famous Emerald City. Our friends were so amazed at the sight that for a while they stood gazing in silent wonder. Then Shaggy exclaimed, "My brother, my dear lost brother! Is he indeed a prisoner in this place?" "Yes," replied Kaliko. "The Ugly One has been here for 2 or 3 years, to my positive knowledge." "But what could he find to eat?" inquired Betsy. "It's an awfully swell place to live in, but one can't breakfast on rubies and diamonds, or even gold." "One doesn't need to, my dear," Kaliko assured her. "The Metal Forest does not fill all this great cavern by any means. Beyond these gold and silver trees are other trees of the real sort, which bear foods very nice to eat. Let us walk in that direction, for I am quite sure we will find Shaggy's brother in that part of the cavern rather than in this." So they began to tramp over the diamond pebbled paths, and at every step they were more and more bewildered by the wondrous beauty of the golden trees with their glittering foliage. Suddenly they heard a scream. Jewels scattered in every direction as someone hidden among the bushes scampered away before them. Then a loud voice cried, "Halt!" and there was the sound of a struggle. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21. A Bashful Brother. With fast beating hearts they all rushed forward, and, beyond a group of stately metal trees, came full upon a most astonishing scene. There was Ruggedo in the hands of the officers of Oogaboo, a dozen of whom were clinging to the old nome and holding him fast in spite of his efforts to escape. There also was Queen Ann, looking grimly upon the scene of strife, but when she observed her former companions approaching, she turned away in a shamefaced manner. For Ann and her officers were indeed a sight to behold. Her Majesty's clothing, once so rich and gorgeous, was now worn and torn into shreds by her long crawl through the tunnel, which, by the way, had led her directly into the Metal Forest. It was, indeed, one of the 3 secret passages, and by far the most difficult of the 3. Ann had not only torn her pretty skirt and jacket, but her crown had become bent and battered, and even her shoes were so cut and slashed that they were ready to fall from her feet. The officers had fared somewhat worse than their leader, for holes were worn in the knees of their trousers, while sharp points of rock in the roof and sides of the tunnel had made rags of every inch of their once brilliant uniforms. A more tattered and woeful army never came out of a battle than these harmless victims of the rocky passage. But it had seemed their only means of escape from the cruel Nome King, so they had crawled on, regardless of their sufferings. When they reached the Metal Forest, their eyes beheld more plunder than they had ever dreamed of, yet they were prisoners in the huge dome and could not escape with the riches heaped about them. Perhaps a more unhappy and homesick lot of conquerors never existed than this band from Oogaboo. After several days of wandering in their marvelous prison, they were frightened by the discovery that Ruggedo had come among them. Rendered desperate by their sad condition, the officers exhibited courage for the first time since they left home, and, ignorant of the fact that Ruggedo was no longer king of the nomes, they threw themselves upon him, and had just succeeded in capturing him when their fellow adventurers reached the spot. "Goodness gracious!" cried Betsy. What happened to you all?" Anne came forward to greet them, sorrowful and indignant. "We were obliged to escape from the pit through a small tunnel, which was lined with sharp and jagged rocks," said she. "And not only was our clothing torn to rags, but our flesh is so bruised and sore that we are stiff and lame in every joint. To add to our troubles, we find we are still prisoners, and now that we have succeeded in capturing the wicked Metal Monarch, we shall force him to grant us our liberty." "Ruggedo is no longer Metal Monarch or King of the Nomes," Files informed her. "He has been deposed and cast out of his kingdom by Quox. But here is the new King, whose name is Kaliko, and I am pleased to assure your Majesty that he is our friend." "Glad to meet your Majesty, I'm sure," said Kaliko, bowing as courteously as if the Queen still wore splendid raiment. The officers, having heard this explanation, now set Ruggedo free, but as he had no place to go he stood by and faced his former servant, who was now king in his place, in a humble and pleading manner. "What are you doing here?" asked Kaliko sternly. "Why, I was promised as much treasure as I could carry in my pockets," replied Ruggedo, "so I came here to get it, not wishing to disturb your Majesty." "You were commanded to leave the country of the nomes forever," declared Kaliko. "I know, and I'll go as soon as I have filled my pockets," said Ruggedo meekly. "Then fill them and be gone," returned the new King. Ruggedo obeyed. Stooping down, he began gathering up jewels by the handful and stuffing them into his many pockets. They were heavy things, these diamonds and rubies and emeralds and amethysts and the like, so before long Ruggedo was staggering with the weight he bore, while the pockets were not yet filled. When he could no longer stoop over without falling, Betsy and Polychrome and the Rose Princess came to his assistance, picking up the finest gems and tucking them into his pockets. At last these were all filled, and Ruggedo presented a comical sight, for surely no man ever before had so many pockets, or any at all filled with such a choice collection of precious stones. He neglected to thank the young ladies for their kindness, but gave them a surly nod of farewell and staggered down the path by the way he had come. They let him depart in silence, for with all he had taken, the masses of jewels upon the ground seemed scarcely to have been disturbed, so numerous were they. Also they hoped that they had seen the last of the degraded king. "I'm awful glad he's gone," said Betsy, sighing deeply. "If he doesn't get reckless and spend his wealth foolishly, he's got enough to start a bank when he gets to Oklahoma." "But my brother, my dear brother, where is he?" inquired Shaggy anxiously. "Have you seen him, Queen Ann?" "What does your brother look like?" asked the Queen. Shaggy hesitated to reply, but Betsy said, "He's called the Ugly One. Perhaps you'll know him by that." "The only person we have seen in this cavern," said Ann, "has run away from us whenever we approached him. He hides over yonder among the trees that are not gold, and we have never been able to catch sight of his face, so I cannot tell whether he is ugly or not." "That must be my dear brother!" exclaimed Shaggy. "Yes, it must be," assented Kaliko. "No one else inhabits this splendid dome, so there can be no mistake." "But why does he hide among those green trees, instead of enjoying all these glittery golden ones?" asked Betsy. "Because he finds food among the natural trees," replied Kaliko. "And I remember that he has built a little house there to sleep in. As for these glittery golden trees, I will admit they are very pretty at first sight. One cannot fail to admire that, as well as the rich jewels scattered beneath them. But if one has to look at them always, they become pretty tame." "I believe that is true," declared Shaggy. My dear brother is very wise to prefer real trees to the imitation ones. But come, let us go there and find him." Shaggy started for the green grove at once, and the others followed him, being curious to witness the final rescue of his long sought, long lost brother. Not far from the edge of the grove they came upon a small hut, cleverly made of twigs and golden branches woven together. As they approached the place they caught a glimpse of a form that darted into the hut and slammed the door tight shut after him. Shaggy Man ran to the door and cried aloud, "Brother! Brother!" "Who calls?" demanded a sad, hollow voice from within. "It is Shaggy, your own loving brother, who has been searching for you a long time, and has now come to rescue you." "Too late," replied the gloomy voice. "No one can rescue me now." "Oh, but you are mistaken about that," said Shaggy. "There is a new King of the Nomes, called Kaliko, in Ruggedo's place, and he has promised you shall go free." "Free? I dare not go free," said the Ugly One, in a voice of despair. "Why not, brother?" asked Shaggy anxiously. "Do you know what they have done to me?" came the answer through the closed door. "No; tell me, brother. What have they done?" "When Ruggedo first captured me I was very handsome. Don't you remember, Shaggy?" "Not very well, brother. You were so young when I left home. But I remember that mother thought you were beautiful." "She was right. I am sure she was right," wailed the prisoner. "But Ruggedo wanted to injure me, to make me ugly in the eyes of all the world. So he performed a wicked enchantment. I went to bed beautiful, or as you might say, handsome. To be very modest, I will merely claim that I was good looking, and I waked the next morning the homeliest man in all the world. I am so repulsive that when I look in a mirror I frighten myself." "Poor brother," said Shaggy softly, and all the others were silent from sympathy.
"I was so ashamed of my looks," continued the voice of Shaggy's brother, "that I tried to hide. But the cruel King Ruggedo forced me to appear before all the legion of nomes, to whom he said, 'Behold the Ugly One!' But when the nomes saw my face they all fell to laughing and jeering, which prevented them from working at their tasks. Seeing this, Ruggedo became angry and pushed me into a tunnel, closing the rock entrance so that I could not get out. I followed the length of the tunnel until I reached this huge dome, where the marvelous metal forest stands, and here I have remained ever since."
"Poor brother," repeated Shaggy. "But I beg you now to come forth and face us, who are your friends. None here will laugh or jeer, however unhandsome you may be."
"No, indeed," they all
added pleadingly. But the Ugly One refused the invitation.
"I cannot," said he. "Indeed, I cannot face strangers, ugly as I am."
Shaggy Man turned to the group surrounding him. "What shall I do?" he asked in a sorrowful voice. "I cannot leave my dear brother here, and he refuses to come out of that house and face us." "I'll tell you," replied Betsy. "Let him put on a mask." "The very idea I was seeking!" exclaimed Shaggy joyfully. And then he called out, "Brother, put a mask over your face, and then none of us can see what your features are like."
"I have no mask," answered the Ugly One.
"Look here," said Betsy. "He can use my handkerchief." Shaggy looked at the little square of cloth and shook his head. "It isn't big enough," he objected. "I'm sure it isn't big enough to hide a man's face. But he can use mine." Saying this, he took from his pocket his own handkerchief and went to the door of the hut. "Here, my brother," he called, "take this handkerchief and make a mask of it. I will also pass you my knife, so that you may cut holes for the eyes, and then you must tie it over your face." The door slowly opened, just far enough for the ugly one to thrust out its hand and take the handkerchief and the knife. Then it closed again. "Don't forget a hole for your nose," called Betsy. "You must breathe, you know." For a time there was silence. Queen Anne and her army sat down upon the ground to rest. Betsy sat on Hank's back. Polychrome danced lightly up and down the jeweled paths, while Files and the Princess wandered through the groves arm in arm. Tik-Tok, who never tired, stood motionless. By and by a noise sounded from within the hut. "Are you ready?" asked Shaggy. "Yes, brother," came the reply, and the door was thrown open to allow the ugly one to step forth. Betsy might have laughed aloud had she not remembered how sensitive to ridicule Shaggy's brother was, for the handkerchief with which he had masked his features was a red one covered with big white polka dots. In this 2 holes had been cut, in front of the eyes, while 2 smaller ones before the nostrils allowed the man to breathe freely. The cloth was then tightly drawn over the ugly one's face and knotted at the back of his neck. He was dressed in clothes that had once been good, but now were sadly worn and frayed. His silk stockings had holes in them, and his shoes were stub-toed and needing blackening. "But what can you expect," whispered Betsy, "when the poor man has been a prisoner for so many years?" Shaggy had darted forward and embraced his newly found brother with both his arms. The brother also embraced Shaggy, who then led him forward and introduced him to all the assembled company. "This is the new Nome King," he said when he came to Kaliko. "He is our friend and has granted you your freedom." "That is a kindly deed," replied Ugly in a sad voice, "but I dread to go back to the world in this direful condition. Unless I remain forever masked, my dreadful face would curdle all the milk and stop all the clocks." "Can't the enchantment be broken in some way?" inquired Betsy. Shaggy looked anxiously at Kaliko, who shook his head. "I am sure I can't break the enchantment," he said. "Ruggedo was fond of magic, and learned a good many enchantments that we nomes know nothing of." "Perhaps Ruggedo himself might break his long enchantment," suggested Ann; "but unfortunately we have allowed the old King to escape." "Never mind, my dear brother," said Shaggy consolingly. "I am very glad to have found you again, although I may never see your face. Let us make the most of this joyful reunion." The Ugly One was affected to tears by this tender speech, and the tears began to wet the red handkerchief, so Shaggy gently wiped them away with his coat sleeve. End of Chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. Kindly Kisses. "Won't you be dreadfully sorry to leave this lovely place?" Betsy asked the Ugly One. "No, indeed," said he. "Jewels and gold are cold and heartless things, and I am sure I would presently have died of loneliness had I not found the natural forest at the edge of the artificial one. Anyhow, without these real trees I should soon have starved to death." Betsy looked around at the quaint trees. "I don't just understand that," she admitted. "What could you find to eat here?" "The best food in the world," Ugly answered. "Do you see that grove at your left?" he added, pointing it out. "Well, such trees as those do not grow in your country, or in any other place but this cavern. I have named them hotel trees because they bear a certain kind of table d'hote fruit called three-course nuts." "That's funny," said Betsy. "What are the three-course nuts like?" "Something like cocoanuts to look at," explained the Ugly One. "All you have to do is pick one of them, and then sit down and eat your dinner. You first unscrew the top part and find a capful of good soup. After you've eaten that, You unscrew the middle part, and find a hollow filled with meat and potatoes, vegetables, and a fine salad. Eat that, and unscrew the next section, and you come to the dessert in the bottom of the nut. That is pie and cake, cheese and crackers, and nuts and raisins. The three-course nuts are not all exactly alike in flavor or in contents, but they are all good, and in each one may be found a complete three-course dinner. "But how about breakfasts?" inquired Betsy. "Why, there are breakfast trees for that, which grow over there at the right. They bear nuts like the others, only the nuts contain coffee or chocolate instead of soup, oatmeal instead of meat and potatoes, and fruits instead of dessert. Sad has been my life in this wonderful prison. I must admit that no one could live more luxuriously at the best hotel in the world than I have lived here. But I will be glad to get into the open air again, and see the good old sun, and the silvery moon, and the soft green grass, and the flowers that are kissed by the morning dew. Ah, how much more lovely are those blessed things than the glitter of gems or the cold gleam of gold." "Of course," said Betsy. "I once knew a little boy who wanted to catch the measles, because all the little boys in his neighborhood but him had 'em, and he was really unhappy 'cause he couldn't catch 'em, try as he would. So I'm pretty certain that the things we want and can't have are not good for us. Isn't that true, Shaggy?" "Not always, my dear," he gravely replied. "If we don't want anything, we would never get anything, good or bad. I think our longings are natural, and if we act as nature prompts us we can't go far wrong." "For my part," said Queen Ann, "I think the world would be a dreary place without the gold and jewels." "All things are good in their way," said Shaggy, "but we may have too much of any good thing, and I have noticed that the value of anything depends upon how scarce it is and how difficult it is to obtain." "Pardon me for interrupting you," said King Kaliko, coming to their side, "but now that we have rescued Shaggy's brother, I would like to return to my royal cavern. Being the King of the Nomes, it is my duty to look after my restless subjects and see that they behave themselves." So they all turned and began walking through the metal forest to the other side of the great domed cave, where they had first entered it. Shaggy and his brother walked side by side, and both seemed rejoiced that they were together after their long separation. Betsy didn't dare look at the polka dot handkerchief for fear she would laugh aloud, so she walked behind the two brothers and led Hank by holding fast to his left ear. When at last they reached the place where the passage led to the outer world, Queen Ann said, in a hesitating way that was unusual with her: "I have not conquered this Nome Country, nor do I expect to do so. But I would like to gather a few of these pretty jewels before I leave this place." "Help yourself, ma'am," said King Kaliko, and at once the officers of the army took advantage of his royal permission and began filling their pockets, while Ann tied a lot of diamonds in a big handkerchief. This accomplished, they all entered the passage, the nomes going first to light the way with their torches. They had not proceeded far when Betsy exclaimed: "Why, there are jewels here, too!" All eyes were turned upon the ground, and they found a regular trail of jewels strewn along the rock floor. "This is queer," said Kaliko, much surprised. "I must send some of my nomes to gather up these gems and replace them in the metal forest, where they belong. I wonder how they came to be here." All the way along the passage they found this trail of jewels, but when they neared the end the mystery was explained. For there, squatted upon the floor with his back to the rock wall, sat old Ruggedo, puffing and blowing as if he were all tired out. Then they realized it was he who had scattered the jewels from his many pockets, which, one by one, had burst with the weight of their contents as he had stumbled along the passage. But I don't mind," said Ruggedo with a deep sigh. "I now realize that I could not have carried such a weighty load very far, even had I managed to escape from this passage with it. The woman who sewed the pockets on my robe used poor thread, for which I shall thank her." "Have you any jewels left?" inquired Betsy. He glanced into some of the remaining pockets. "A few," said he, "but they will be sufficient to supply my wants, and I no longer have any desire to be rich. If some of you will kindly help me to rise, I'll get out of here and leave you, for I know you all despise me and prefer my room to my company." Shaggy and Kaliko raised the old King to his feet, when he was confronted by Shaggy's brother, whom he now noticed for the first time. The queer and unexpected appearance of the Ugly One so startled Ruggedo that he gave a wild cry and began to tremble as if he had seen a ghost. "Who is this?" he faltered. "I am that helpless prisoner whom your cruel magic transformed from a handsome man into an ugly one," answered Shaggy's brother in a voice of stern reproach. "Really, Ruggedo," said Betsy, "you ought to be ashamed of that mean trick." "I am, my dear," admitted Ruggedo, who was now as meek and humble as formerly he had been cruel and vindictive. "Then," returned the girl, "you'd better do some more magic and give the poor man his own face again." "I wish I could," answered the old King; "but you must remember that Tititi Hoochoo has deprived me of all my magic powers. However, I never took the trouble to learn just how to break the charm I cast over Shaggy's brother, for I intended he should always remain ugly." "Every charm," remarked pretty Polychrome, "has its antidote, and if you knew this charm of ugliness, Ruggedo, you must have known how to dispel it." He shook his head. "If I did, I've forgotten," he stammered regretfully. "Try to think," pleaded Shaggy anxiously. "Please try to think." Ruggedo ruffled his hair with both hands, sighed, slapped his chest, rubbed his ear, and stared stupidly around the group. "I've a faint recollection that there was one thing that would break the charm," said he, "but misfortune has so addled my brain that I can't remember what it was." "See here, Ruggedo," said Betsy sharply, "we've treated you pretty well so far, but we won't stand for any nonsense, and if you know what's good for yourself you'll think of that charm." "Why?" he demanded, turning to look wonderingly at the little girl. "Because it means so much to Shaggy's brother. He's dreadfully ashamed of himself, the way he is now, and you're to blame for it. Fact is, Ruggedo, you've done so much wickedness in your life that it won't hurt you to do a kind act now." Ruggedo blinked at her and sighed again, and then tried very hard to think. "I seem to remember dimly," said he, "that a certain kind of a kiss will break the charm of ugliness." "What kind of a kiss?" "What kind? Why, uh, it was either the kiss of a mortal maid, or, or, or the kiss of a mortal maid who had once been a fairy, or, or the kiss of one who is still a fairy. I can't remember which. But of course no maid, mortal or fairy, would ever consent to kiss a person so ugly, so dreadfully, fearfully, terribly ugly as Shaggy's brother." "I'm not so sure of that," said Betsy with admirable courage. "I'm a mortal maid, and if it is my kiss that will break this awful charm, I'll do it." "Oh, you really couldn't," protested Ugly. "I would be obliged to remove my mask, and when you saw my face nothing could induce you to kiss me, generous as you are." "Well, as for that," said the little girl, "I needn't see your face at all. Here's my plan. You stay in this dark passage, and we'll send away the gnomes with their torches. Then you'll take off the handkerchief, and I'll kiss you." "That is awfully kind of you, Betsy," said Shaggy gratefully. "Well, it surely won't kill me," she replied, "and if it makes you and your brother happy, I'm willing to take some chances." So Kaliko ordered the torch bearers to leave the passage, which they did by going through the rock opening. Queen Anne and her army also went out, but the others were so interested in Betsy's experiment that they remained grouped at the mouth of the passageway. When the big rock swung into place, closing tight the opening, they were left in total darkness. "Now then," said Betsy in a cheerful voice, "have you got that handkerchief off your face, Ugly?" "Yes," he replied. "Well, where are you, then?" she asked, reaching out her arms. "Here," said he. "You'll have to stoop down, you know." He found her hands, and clasping them in his own, stooped until his face was near to that of the little girl. The others heard a clear, smacking kiss, and then Betsy exclaimed, "There, I've done it, and it didn't hurt a bit." "Tell me, dear brother, is the charm broken?" asked Shaggy. "I do not know," was the reply. "It may be, or it may not be. I cannot tell." "Has anyone a match?" inquired Betsy. "I have several," said Shaggy. "Then let Ruggedo strike one of them and look at your brother's face, while we all turn our backs. Ruggedo made your brother ugly, so I guess he can stand the horror of looking at him, if the charm isn't broken." Agreeing to this, Ruggedo took the match and lighted it. He gave one look and then blew out the match. "Ugly as ever," he said with a shudder. "So it wasn't the kiss of a mortal maid, after all." "Let me try," proposed the Rose Princess in her sweet voice. "I am a mortal maid who was once a fairy. Perhaps my kiss will break the charm." Files did not wholly approve of this, but he was too generous to interfere, so the Rose Princess felt her way through the darkness to Shaggy's brother and kissed him. Ruggedo struck another match, while they all turned away. "No," announced the Farmer King, "that didn't break the charm either. It must be the kiss of a fairy that is required, or else my memory has failed me altogether." "Polly," said Betsy pleadingly, "won't you try?" "Of course I will," answered Polychrome with a merry laugh. "I've never kissed a mortal man in all the thousands of years I've existed, but I'll do it to please our faithful Shaggy Man, whose unselfish affection for his ugly brother deserves to be rewarded." Even as Polychrome was speaking, she tripped lightly to the side of the ugly one and quickly touched his cheek with her lips. "Oh, thank you!" he fervently cried. "I've changed this time. I know. I can feel it. I'm different. Shaggy, dear Shaggy, I am myself again." Files, who was near the opening, touched the spring that released the big rock, and it suddenly swung backward and let in a flood of daylight. Everyone stood motionless, staring hard at Shaggy's brother, who, no longer masked by the polka-dot handkerchief, met their gaze with a glad smile. "Well," said Shaggy Man, breaking the silence at last, and drawing a long, deep breath of satisfaction, "you are no longer the ugly one, my dear brother. But, to be entirely frank with you, the face that belongs to you is no more handsome than it ought to be." "I think he's rather good looking," remarked Betsy, gazing at the man critically. "In comparison with what he was," said King Kaliko, "he is really beautiful. You who never beheld his ugliness may not understand that, but it was my misfortune to look at the ugly one many times, and I say again that, in comparison with what he was, the man is now beautiful." "All right," returned Betsy briskly. "We'll take your word for it, Kaliko. And now let us get out of this tunnel and into the world again." End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23 Ruggedo Reforms. It did not take them long to regain the royal cavern of the Nome King, where Kaliko ordered served to them the nicest refreshments the place offered. Ruggedo had come trailing along after the rest of the party, and while no one paid any attention to the old King, they did not offer any objection to his presence or command him to leave them. He looked fearfully to see if the eggs were still guarding the entrance, but they had now disappeared, so he crept into the cavern after the others and humbly squatted down in a corner of the room. There Betsy discovered him. All of the little girl's companions were now so happy at the success of Shaggy's quest for his brother, and the laughter and merriment seemed so general, that Betsy's heart softened toward the friendless old man who had once been their bitter enemy, and she carried to him some of the food and drink. Ruggedo's eyes filled with tears at this unexpected kindness. He took the child's hand in his own and pressed it gratefully. "Look here, Kaliko," said Betsy, addressing the new King. "What's the use of being so hard on Ruggedo? All his magic power is gone, so he can't do any more harm, and I'm sure he's sorry he acted so badly to everybody." "Are you?" asked Kaliko, looking down at his former master. "I am," said Ruggedo. "The girl speaks truly. I'm sorry, and I'm harmless. I don't want to wander through the wide world on top of the ground, for I'm a nome. No nome can ever be happy any place but underground." "That being the case," said Kaliko, "I will let you stay here as long as you behave yourself, but if you try to act badly again I shall drive you out as Tititi Hoochoo has commanded, and you'll have to wander." "Never fear, I'll behave," promised Ruggedo. "It is hard work being a King, and harder still to be a good King, but now that I am a common nome I am sure I can lead a blameless life." They were all pleased to hear this, and to know that Ruggedo had really reformed. "I hope he'll keep his word," whispered Betsy to Shaggy. "But if he gets bad again we will be far away from the Nome Kingdom, and Kaliko will have to tend to the old Nome himself." Polychrome had been a little restless during the last hour or two. The lovely daughter of the Rainbow knew that she had now done all in her power to assist her earth friends, and so she began to long for her sky home. "I think," she said, after listening intently, "that it is beginning to rain. The Rain King is my uncle, you know, and perhaps he can read my thoughts and is going to help me. Anyway, I must take a look at the sky and make sure." So she jumped up and ran through the passage to the outer entrance, and they all followed after her and grouped themselves on a ledge of the mountainside. Sure enough, dark clouds had filled the sky, and a slow, drizzling rain had set in. "It can't last for long," said Shaggy, looking upward, "and when it stops we shall lose the sweet little fairy we have learned to love. Alas!" he continued, after a moment, "the clouds are already breaking in the west, and see, isn't that the rainbow coming?" Betsy didn't look at the sky. She looked at Polychrome, whose happy, smiling face surely foretold the coming of her father to take her to the cloud palaces. A moment later a gleam of sunshine flooded the mountain, and a gorgeous rainbow appeared. With a cry of gladness Polychrome sprang upon a point of rock and held out her arms. Straightway the rainbow descended until its end was at her very feet, when, with a graceful leap, she sprang upon it and was at once clasped in the arms of her radiant sisters, the daughters of the Rainbow. But Polychrome released herself, to lean over the edge of the glowing arch and nod and smile and throw a dozen kisses to her late comrades. "Good bye!" she called, and they all shouted "Good bye!" in return, and waved their hands to their pretty friend. Slowly the magnificent bow lifted and melted into the sky, until the eyes of the earnest watchers saw only fleecy clouds flitting across the blue. "I'm dreadfully sorry to see Polychrome go," said Betsy, who felt like crying, "but I suppose she'll be a good deal happier with her sisters in the sky palaces." "To be sure," returned Shaggy, nodding gravely. "It's her home, you know, and those poor wanderers who, like ourselves, have no home, can realize what that means to her." "Once," said Betsy, "I, too, had a home. Now I've only dear old Hank." She twined her arms around her shaggy friend, who was not human, and he said, "Hee haw," in a tone that showed he understood her mood. And the shaggy friend, who was human, stroked the child's head tenderly and said, "You're wrong about that, Betsy dear. I will never desert you." "Nor I," exclaimed Shaggy's brother in earnest tones. The little girl looked up at them gratefully, and her eyes smiled through their tears. "All right," she said. "It's raining again, so let's go back into the cavern." Rather soberly, for all loved Polychrome and would miss her, they re-entered the dominions of the Nome King. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 24. Dorothy is Delighted. "Well," said Queen Ann, when all were again seated in Kaliko's royal cavern, "I wonder what we shall do next. If I could find my way back to Oogaboo, I'd take my army home at once, for I'm sick and tired of these dreadful hardships." "Don't you want to conquer the world?" asked Betsy. "No, I've changed my mind about that," admitted the Queen. "The world is too big for one person to conquer, and I was happier with my own people in Oogaboo. I wish, oh, how earnestly I wish, that I was back there this minute." "So do I!" yelled every officer in a fervent tone. Now it is time for the reader to know that in the faraway land of Oz the lovely ruler Ozma has been following the adventures of her Shaggy Man and Tik-Tok and all the others they had met. Day by day Ozma, with the wonderful Wizard of Oz seated beside her, had gazed upon a magic picture in a radium frame which occupied one side of the ruler's cozy boudoir in the palace of the Emerald City. The singular thing about this magic picture was that it showed whatever scene Ozma wished to see, with the figures all in action just as it was taking place. So Ozma and the Wizard had watched every action of the adventurers from the time Shaggy had met shipwrecked Betsy and Hank in the Rose Kingdom, at which time the Rose Princess, a distant cousin of Ozma, had been exiled by her heartless subjects. When Ann and her people so earnestly wished to return to Oogaboo, Ozma was sorry for them, and remembered that Oogaboo was a corner of the Land of Oz. She turned to her attendant and asked, "Cannot your magic take these unhappy people to their old home, Wizard?" "It can, your Highness," replied the little Wizard. "I think the poor Queen has suffered enough in her misguided effort to conquer the world," said Ozma, smiling at the absurdity of the undertaking. "So no doubt she will hereafter be contented in her own little kingdom. Please send her there, Wizard, and with her the officers and Files." "How about the Rose Princess?" asked the Wizard. "Send her to Oogaboo with Files," answered Ozma. "They have become such good friends that I am sure it would make them unhappy to separate them." "Very well," said the Wizard, and without any fuss or mystery whatever he performed a magical rite that was simple and effective. Therefore those seated in the Nome King's cavern were both startled and amazed when all the people of Oogaboo suddenly disappeared from the room, and with them the Rose Princess. At first they did not understand it at all, But presently Shaggy suspected the truth, and believing that Ozma was now taking an interest in the party, he drew from his pocket a tiny instrument which he placed against his ear. Ozma, observing this action in her magic picture, at once caught up a similar instrument from a table beside her and held it to her own ear. The two instruments recorded the same delicate vibrations of sound and formed a wireless telephone, an invention of the Wizard. Those separated by any distance were thus enabled to converse together with perfect ease and without any wire connection. "Do you hear me, Shaggy Man?" asked Ozma. "Yes, your Highness," he replied. "I have sent the people of Oogaboo back to their own little valley," announced the ruler of Oz, "so do not worry over their disappearance." "That was very kind of you," said Shaggy, "but your Highness must permit me to report that my own mission here is now ended. I have found my lost brother, and he is now beside me, freed from the enchantment of ugliness which Ruggedo cast upon him. Tik-Tok has served me and my comrades faithfully, as you requested him to do, and I hope you will now transport the Clockwork Man back to your fairyland of Oz." "I will do that," replied Ozma. "But how about yourself, Shaggy?" "I have been very happy in Oz," he said, "but my duty to others forces me to exile myself from that delightful land. I must take care of my new found brother, for one thing, and I have a new comrade in a dear little girl named Betsy Bobbin, who has no home to go to, and no other friends but me and a small donkey named Hank. I have promised Betsy never to desert her as long as she needs a friend, and so I must give up the delights of the Land of Oz forever." He said this with a sigh of regret, and Ozma made no reply but laid the tiny instrument on her table, thus cutting off all further communication with the Shaggy Man. But the lovely ruler of Oz still watched her magic picture with a thoughtful expression upon her face, and the little Wizard of Oz watched Ozma and smiled softly to himself. In the cavern of the Nome King, Shaggy replaced the wireless telephone in his pocket, and, turning to Betsy, said in as cheerful a voice as he could muster, "Well, little comrade, what shall we do next?" "I don't know, I'm sure," she answered with a puzzled face. "I'm kind of sorry our adventures are over, for I enjoyed them. And now that Queen Ann and her people are gone, and Polychrome is gone, and dear me, where's Tik-Tok, Shaggy?" "He also has disappeared," said Shaggy, looking around the cavern and nodding wisely. "By this time he is in Ozma's palace in the Land of Oz, which is his home." "Isn't it your home, too?" asked Betsy. "It used to be, my dear, but now my home is wherever you and my brother are. We are wanderers, you know, but if we stick together I'm sure we shall have a good time." "Then," said the girl, "let us get out of this stuffy underground cavern and go in search of new adventures. I'm sure it has stopped raining." "I'm ready," said Shaggy, and then they bade good bye to King Kaliko and thanked him for his assistance, and went out to the mouth of the passage. The sky was now clear and a brilliant blue in color. The sun shone brightly, and even this rugged, rocky country seemed delightful after their confinement underground. There were but four of them now, Betsy and Hank and Shaggy and his brother, and the little party made their way down the mountain and followed a faint path that led toward the southwest. During this time Ozma had been holding a conference with the Wizard, and later with Tik-Tok, whom the magic of the Wizard had quickly transported to Ozma's palace. Tik-Tok had only words of praise for Betsy Bobbin, who, he said, is almost as nice as Dorothy herself. "Let us send for Dorothy," said Ozma, and summoning her favorite maid, who was named Jellia Jam, she asked her to request Princess Dorothy to attend her at once. So a few moments later Dorothy entered Ozma's room and greeted her and the Wizard and Tik-Tok with the same gentle smile and simple manner that had won for the little girl the love of every one she met. "Did you want to see me, Ozma?" she asked. "Yes, dear. I am puzzled how to act, and I want your advice." "I don't believe it's worth much," replied Dorothy, "but I'll do the best I can. What is it all about, Ozma?" "You all know," said the girl Ruler, addressing her three friends, "what a serious thing it is to admit any mortals into this fairyland of Oz. It is true I have invited several mortals to make their home here, and all of them have proved true and loyal subjects. Indeed, no one of you three was a native of Oz. Dorothy and the Wizard came here from the United States, and Tik-Tok came from the land of Ev. But of course he is not a mortal. Shaggy is another American, and he is the cause of all my worry, for our dear Shaggy will not return here and desert the new friends he has found in his recent adventures, because he believes they need his services." "Shaggy Man was always kind-hearted," remarked Dorothy. "But who are these new friends he has found?" "One is his brother, who for many years has been a prisoner of the Nome King, our old enemy Ruggedo. This brother seems a kindly, honest fellow, but he has done nothing to entitle him to a home in the Land of Oz." "Who else?" asked Dorothy. "I have told you about Betsy Bobbin, the little girl who was shipwrecked, in much the same way you once were, and has since been following the Shaggy Man in his search for his lost brother. You remember her, do you not?" "Oh, yes!" exclaimed Dorothy. "I've often watched her and Hank in the Magic Picture, you know. She's a dear little girl, and old Hank is a darling. Where are they now?" "Look and see," replied Ozma, with a smile at her friend's enthusiasm. Dorothy turned to the picture, which showed Betsy and Hank, with Shaggy and his brother, trudging along the rocky paths of a barren country. "Seems to me," she said musingly, "that they're a good way from any place to sleep, or any nice things to eat." "You are right," said Tik-Tok. "I have been in that country, and it is a wilderness." "It is the country of the nomes," explained the Wizard, "who are so mischievous that no one cares to live near them. I'm afraid Shaggy and his friends will endure many hardships before they get out of that rocky place, unless—" he turned to Ozma and smiled. "Unless I ask you to transport them all here?" she asked. "Yes, your Highness." "Could your magic do that?" inquired Dorothy. "I think so," said the Wizard. "Well," said Dorothy, "as far as Betsy and Hank are concerned, I'd like to have them here in Oz. It would be such fun to have a girl playmate of my own age, you see, and Hank is such a dear little mule." Ozma laughed at the wistful expression in the girl's eyes, and then she drew Dorothy to her and kissed her. "Am I not your friend and playmate?" she asked. Dorothy flushed. "You know how dearly I love you, Ozma," she cried, "but you're so busy ruling all this Land of Oz that we can't always be together." "I know, dear. My first duty is to my subjects, and I think it would be a delight to us all to have Betsy with us. There's a pretty suite of rooms just opposite your own where she can live, and I'll build a golden stall for Hank in the stable where the Sawhorse lives. Then we'll introduce the mule to the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger, and I'm sure they will soon become firm friends. But I cannot very well admit Betsy and Hank into Oz unless I also admit Shaggy's brother." "And unless you admit Shaggy's brother, you will keep out poor Shaggy, whom we are all fond of," said the Wizard. "Well, why not admit him?" demanded Tik-Tok. "The Land of Oz is not a refuge for all mortals in distress," explained Ozma. "I do not wish to be unkind to Shaggy Man, but his brother has no claim on me." "The Land of Oz isn't crowded," suggested Dorothy. Then you advise me to admit Shaggy's brother? Inquired Ozma. Well, we can't afford to lose our Shaggy man, can we? No, indeed, remarked Ozma. What do you say, Wizard? I'm getting my magic ready to transport them all. And you, Tik-Tok? Shaggy's brother is a good fellow, and we can't spare Shaggy. So then the question is settled, decided Ozma. Perform your magic, Wizard. He did so, placing a silver plate upon a small standard and pouring upon the plate a small quantity of pink powder, which was contained in a crystal vial. Then he muttered a rather difficult incantation which the sorceress Glinda the Good had taught him, and it all ended in a puff of perfumed smoke from the silver plate. This smoke was so pungent that it made both Ozma and Dorothy rub their eyes for a moment. "You must pardon these disagreeable fumes," said the Wizard. "I assure you the smoke is a very necessary part of my wizardry." "Look!" cried Dorothy, pointing to the magic picture. "They're gone! All of them are gone!" Indeed, the picture now showed the same rocky landscape as before, but the three people and the mule had disappeared from it. "They are gone," said the Wizard, polishing the silver plate and wrapping it in a fine cloth, "because they are here." At that moment Jellia Jam entered the room. "Your Highness," she said to Ozma, "the Shaggy Man and another man are in the waiting room and ask to pay their respects to you. Shaggy is crying like a baby, but he says they are tears of joy." "Send them here at once, Jellia," commanded Ozma. "Also," continued the maid, "a girl and a small-sized mule have mysteriously arrived, but they don't seem to know where they are or how they got here. Shall I send them here, too?" "Oh, no!" exclaimed Dorothy, eagerly jumping up from her chair. "I'll go meet Betsy myself, for she'll feel awful strange in this big palace." And she ran down the stairs two at a time to greet her new friend, Betsy Bobbin. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25. The Land of Love. "Well, is hee-haw all you are able to say?" inquired the Sawhorse, as he examined Hank with his knot eyes and slowly wagged the branch that served him for a tail. They were in a beautiful stable in the rear of Ozma's palace, where the wooden Sawhorse, very much alive, lived in a gold-paneled stall, and where there were rooms for the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger, which were filled with soft cushions for them to lie upon and golden troughs for them to eat from. Beside the stall of the Sawhorse had been placed another for Hank the Mule. This was not quite so beautiful as the other, for the Sawhorse was Ozma's favorite steed, but Hank had a supply of cushions for a bed, which the Sawhorse did not need because he never slept. And all this luxury was so strange to the little mule that he could only stand still and regard his surroundings and his queer companions with wonder and amazement. The Cowardly Lion, looking very dignified, was stretched out upon the marble floor of the stable, eyeing Hank with a calm and critical gaze, while nearby crouched the huge Hungry Tiger, who seemed equally interested in the new animal that had just arrived. The Sawhorse, standing stiffly before Hank, repeated his question. "Is hee-haw all you are able to say?" Hank moved his ears in an embarrassed manner. "I've never said anything else until now," he replied, and then he began to tremble with fright to hear himself talk. "I can well understand that," remarked the Lion, wagging his great head with a swaying motion. "Strange things happen in this Land of Oz, as they do everywhere else." I believe you came here from the cold, civilized outside world, did you not?"
"I did," replied Hank. "One minute I was outside of Oz, and the next minute I was inside. That was enough to give me a nervous shock, as you may guess. But to find myself able to talk, as Betsy does, is a marvel that staggers me."
"That is because you are in the Land of Oz," said the Sawhorse. "All animals talk in this favored country, and you must admit it is more sociable than to bray your dreadful hee-haw, which nobody can understand."
"Mules understand it very well," declared Hank.
"Oh, indeed. Then there must be other mules in the outside world," said the Tiger, yawning sleepily.
"There are a great many in America," said Hank. "Are you the only tiger in Oz?"
"No," acknowledged the Tiger. "I have many relatives living in the jungle country, but I am the only tiger living in the Emerald City." "There are other lions, too," said the Sawhorse, "but I am the only horse of any description in this favored land."
"That is why this land is favored," said the Tiger. "You must understand, friend Hank, that the Sawhorse puts on airs because he is shod with plates of gold, and because our beloved ruler, Ozma of Oz, likes to ride upon his back."
"Betsy rides upon my back," declared Hank proudly.
"Who is Betsy?"
"The dearest, sweetest girl in all the world."
The Sawhorse gave an angry snort and stamped his golden feet. The Tiger crouched and growled. Slowly the great Lion rose to his feet, his mane bristling.
"Friend Hank," said he, "either you are mistaken in judgment, or you are willfully trying to deceive us. The dearest, sweetest girl in the world is our Dorothy, and I will fight anyone, animal or human, who dares to deny it."
"So will I," snarled the Tiger, showing 2 rows of enormous white teeth.
"You are all wrong," asserted the Sawhorse in a voice of scorn. "No girl living can compare with my mistress, Ozma of Oz."
Hank slowly turned around until his heels were toward the others. Then he said stubbornly,
"I am not mistaken in my statement, nor will I admit that there can be a sweeter girl alive than Betsy Bobbin. If you want to fight, come on. I'm ready for you." While they hesitated, eyeing Hank's heels doubtfully, a merry peal of laughter startled the animals, and turning their heads, they beheld 3 lovely girls standing just within the richly carved entrance to the stable. In the center was Ozma, her arms encircling the waists of Dorothy and Betsy, who stood on either side of her. Ozma was nearly half a head taller than the 2 other girls, who were almost of one size. Unobserved, they had listened to the talk of the animals, which was a very strange experience indeed to little Betsy Bobbin. "You foolish beasts!" exclaimed the ruler of Oz, in a gentle but chiding voice. "Why should you fight to defend us, who are all 3 loving friends, and in no sense rivals? Answer me," she continued, as they bowed their heads sheepishly.
"I have the right to express my opinion, Your Highness," pleaded the Lion.
"And so have the others," replied Ozma. "I am glad you and the Hungry Tiger love Dorothy best, for she was your first friend and companion. Also, I am pleased that my Sawhorse loves me best, for together we have endured both joy and sorrow. Hank has proved his faith and loyalty by defending his own little mistress, and so you are all right in one way, but wrong in another. Our Land of Oz is a land of love, and here friendship outranks every other quality. Unless you can all be friends, you cannot retain our love." They accepted this rebuke very meekly. "All right," said the Sawhorse quite cheerfully. "Shake hoofs, friend Mule." Hank touched his hoof to that of the wooden horse. "Let us be friends and rub noses," said the tiger. So Hank modestly rubbed noses with the big beast. The lion merely nodded and said, as he crouched before the mule, "Any friend of our beloved ruler is a friend of the Cowardly Lion. That seems to cover your case. If ever you need help or advice, friend Hank, call on me." "Why, this is as it should be," said Ozma, highly pleased to see them so fully reconciled. Then she turned to her companions. "Come, my dears, let us resume our walk." As they turned away, Betsy said wonderingly, "Do all the animals in Oz talk as we do?" "Almost all," answered Dorothy. "There's a yellow hen here, and she can talk, and so can her chickens. And there's a pink kitten upstairs in my room who talks very nicely. But I've a little fuzzy black dog named Toto who has been with me in Oz a long time, and he's never said a single word but 'bow wow.'" "Do you know why?" asked Ozma. "Why, he's a Kansas dog, so I suppose he's different from these fairy animals," replied Dorothy. "Hank isn't a fairy animal any more than Toto," said Ozma. "Yet as soon as he came under the spell of our fairyland, he found he could talk. It was the same way with Billina, the yellow hen, whom you brought here at one time. The same spell has affected Toto, I assure you. But he's a wise little dog, and while he knows everything that is said to him, he prefers not to talk." "Goodness me!" exclaimed Dorothy. "I never 'spected Toto was fooling me all this time." Then she drew a small silver whistle from her pocket and blew a shrill note upon it. A moment later there was a sound of scurrying footsteps, and a shaggy black dog came running up the path. Dorothy knelt down before him, and shaking her finger just above his nose, she said, "Toto, haven't I always been good to you?" Toto looked up at her with his bright black eyes and wagged his tail. "Bow wow!" he said, and Betsy knew at once that meant yes, as well as Dorothy and Ozma knew it, for there was no mistaking the tone of Toto's voice. "That's a dog answer," said Dorothy. "How would you like it, Toto, if I said nothing to you but 'bow wow'?" Toto's tail was wagging furiously now, but otherwise he was silent. "Really, Dorothy," said Betsy, "he can talk with his bark and his tail just as well as we can. Don't you understand such dog language?" "Of course I do," replied Dorothy, "but Toto's got to be more sociable. See here, sir," she continued, addressing the dog, "I've just learned for the first time that you can say words if you want to. Don't you want to, Toto?" "Woof!" said Toto, and that meant no. "Just one word, Toto, to prove you're as any other animal in Oz." "Woof!" "Just one word, Toto, and then you may run away." He looked at her steadily a moment. "All right, here I go," he said, and darted away as swift as an arrow. Dorothy clasped her hands in delight, while Betsy and Ozma both laughed heartily at her pleasure and the success of her experiment. Arm in arm they sauntered away through the beautiful gardens of the palace, where magnificent flowers bloomed in abundance and fountains shot their silvery sprays far into the air. And by, as they turned a corner, they came upon Shaggy Man and his brother, who were seated together upon a golden bench. The two arose to bow respectfully as the ruler of Oz approached them. "How are you enjoying our Land of Oz?" Ozma asked the stranger. "I am very happy here, Your Highness," replied Shaggy's brother. "Also, I am very grateful to you for permitting me to live in this delightful place." "You must thank Shaggy for that," said Ozma. "Being his brother, I have made you welcome here." "When you know Brother better," said Shaggy earnestly, "you will be glad he has become one of your loyal subjects. I am just getting acquainted with him myself, and I find much in his character to admire." Leaving the brothers, Ozma and the girls continued their walk. Presently Betsy exclaimed, "Shaggy's brother can't ever be as happy in Oz as I am. Do you know, Dorothy, I didn't believe any girl could ever have such a good time anywhere as I'm having now." "I know," answered Dorothy. "I felt that way myself lots of times." "I wish," continued Betsy dreamily, "that every little girl in the world could live in the Land of Oz, and every little boy, too." Ozma laughed at this. "It is quite fortunate for us, Betsy, that your wish cannot be granted," said she, "for all that army of girls and boys would crowd us so that we would have to move away." "Yes," agreed Betsy, after a little thought, "I guess that's true." End of chapter 25. End of Tik-Tok of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This recording by Phil Chenevert in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, October 2013. Thank you for listening.
Hello, Emma. I've stream on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays, or at least try to. And there is my mother is coming for a month shortly, next week, so I won't be doing it for about a month. So this is the last one for about a month. It's mid-August. I'll be back streaming. We'll be around, but I won't be streaming at all. Just because I'm not young and neither is my mother, so gotta spend as much time with her as I can. And my nephew's coming to visit too, so what's the... Oh, thank you. I'm certainly giving it a try. If I do, I do, and if I don't, I don't. Like I said, it'll be about... Let's see here. I would expect, I can't remember exactly which day, but the week of the 17th, I should be back doing this with the next book in the Oz series, or something else, I'm not sure. There's a lot of books in the Oz series. And Carson? What's the mod about? It's listed on... what's the mod about? And if it's on Nexus, I'll find it on there, I guess. A trader's tablet. Oh, okay. I'll go have a look and see if it's something I'm going to put on my save. I'm not really a... Yes, I only stream on YouTube right now. It's really all I bother with. I'm not very good at the socials and the, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'll have a look at what the Nexus page says, Carson. But I'm not one to put a lot of like random mods on my saves. It's all my mods are just crops mostly, and crops mods, and a bunch of chickens. Awesome. Yeah, I will have a look and see if it's newly out. Yeah. Oh, absolutely, Emma. It's it's interesting, we'll say. But I do a Saturday night stream, and it's 8:30 right now my time, so it would have ended about an hour ago, or it would have started about an hour ago on Saturdays, but it's just me and a couple of gals, and we just kind of chat about whatever gets our fancy, and sometimes I play, and sometimes I'll draw or do something else. And cool. Animators pretty good too, and video editor is not a bad skill to have for sure. I've done a lot of computery stuff. I don't know, I was network technician for 20 odd years, but at least the better part of 20 odd years. I think I got my certification or diploma or whatever you mind to call it in 99 or so. I don't do a whole lot. I have health issues that really mess up my my hips and back, and mind when the pain gets too bad. So I'm just learning whatever I can get my hands on to learn, and that's about it. You know, I just kind of float through the world. So, but anyway, I'm done now. I need to get finished up to do the cleaning and stuff. I've only got a couple of days. Yeah, you can if you my contacts should be in the description, because I'm smart and my brain works well. No, I don't do Discord. I don't communicate privately with anybody. And that's a hard, I'm not going to do it. But if you've got some stuff on Twitter or whatever, or not Twitter, I'm not really on there anymore. I think I took it out of the description even. But I'm on Blue Sky and a few other places I can go look if you follow me on there. Like I said, I don't do Discord, or I talk to some friends on Discord, but I don't even turn it on most days, and don't really do anything on there. So, but anyway, I should go. I am hotter than heck, and it's been a few hours, so I hope thanks for coming by and visiting, and I really hope to see you again next time. Like I said, in a month's time, we'll look you up, or look me up. Have a great day. Bye. Yes.